morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski, and today it is the head of commercial sales, the guy who is building a fast, high-velocity, 14-day sales cycle, the one and only Chris Nethercote. Nick, why should people listen?
So Chris just started a new head of sales role, and what we got into were what the things he looked at before starting the job to build his hypothesis of what he would change, what he changed, how he changed it, and what problems he let burn. And we got into lots of things like building discount menus. We got into things about how he actually analyzed the data to form a hypothesis around accelerating sales cycles. So this is a really, really great one. If one, you're starting in a new org, or if you're moving to a new segment, or if you just want to figure out how Chris made an immediate impact on the biz.
Started with a 3-call close and a 2-call close, and now it's a 1-call close. Let's roll. Alrighty, Chris, welcome to the show. We start every show with your top 3 actionable leadership takeaways. Let's get your 3.
Yeah, number 1 is learn the product, especially if you are new in your leadership role. You can't do anything very effectively if you don't have a really good understanding of your product as a new leader. The thing that I think works best on this is run some deals yourself immediately. Run a couple, get an understanding of the product, see what questions you get hung up on, and dive in first.
Here's a hint. Chris is not the useless VP of sales. All right, bring us home. What's number 2?
Number 2 is set dedicated times specifically for coaching. Have different one-on-ones. So have a specific one-on-one for pipeline, a specific one-on-one for coaching. This requires that you do homework as the sales leader to watch some calls, put some notes together. It also frames the meeting very well for your AE. They know that they're going to be coached. They're in the right frame of mind to get feedback, which is much better than just peppering people with Slack and things that are top of mind in real time for you, but not real time for them.
Alrighty, killer. Number 3.
3 is discount menu. I love putting a discount menu together. They'll look a little bit different for every company that you might work at, but it makes it really easy for your buyers to say, great, these are the levers that I can pull to get a lower price. And it takes away some of that weird negotiation. It makes it easier for pricing conversations to happen, particularly with AEs that are a little bit more junior in their career. And ultimately, it'll raise your ACVs because you make it simple.
All right, Chris, there's certainly a dumb joke about discount menu and Armand ordering takeout, but I'm not going to make it. Talk to me more about this discount menu. You used this at your previous company, and you're now rolling it out at your new company. How did you explain this to your reps? So how did you explain, hey, this is something we're going to be rolling out?
Yeah. So the first thing is you explain what's important to you as a company. And that obviously is what dictates the inputs into the discount menu. So if it's really important that you get annual upfront net 30 or better terms, great. That's a lever you should offer to your customers. Ultimately, what's behind it is allowing you to raise your ACVs by taking some of that weirdness and discomfort away from negotiation. I don't care how many times you read books on negotiation and listen to sales influencers on LinkedIn. Like, some reps are just not going to be comfortable doing it. Some people just aren't comfortable talking about price. So this takes that away. It also makes it super easy for your customer to make a decision quickly. So the 2 outcomes when explaining this to reps are, 1, this is going to raise your deal values because you're going to put a set menu in place, and there's a limit to how far you can go, and your customer sees it and they know it. And then it's also going to accelerate your deal cycles because you're not going to have to schedule these long drawn out negotiation calls in most cases. And you enable the reps to do a lot of it themselves versus having to have these escalation calls and all that sort of stuff with leadership to really dig in on negotiations. There will be examples of that, obviously, but it's designed to make it easier and sell higher deal values.
One of the things you were telling me on the prep call was the different levers on that discount menu are based on what's important to your company. Could you give some examples? So current company, what are some of those levers? Previous company, what are some of those levers? And then maybe other examples that you know might be relevant to other people who are listening to this and thinking, I want to build my own discount menu.
Yeah, for sure. So current company, like I just joined, but what's really clear is that we have 2 different sales cycles within our commercial segment. We have this small business segment, and then we have this mid-market segment. The mid-market segment, those deals are going to be larger. They're going to be a little bit more labor intensive. The small business segment, those are obviously going to be slightly smaller deals. We need to provide them with an amazing buying experience, but we also need to accelerate that buying experience so that they don't take into the time that we have to invest in those larger deals that might be worth 3, 4, 5x the contract value of that initial deal. So what's important for me, if you can put that together, is velocity, right? So one of those things is if you sign up for a trial, I'm going to incentivize you to sign on for an additional year within the scope of that free trial. If we can help you make a decision within 14 days, awesome. That is worth money to me for sure. So that is one discount lever that we can pull. The other thing that's important to us at this stage is we want word of mouth. We want positive sentiment out in the marketplace. So I am totally willing to incentivize and offer a discount for folks that are willing to write a case study for us. Obviously, let's put that in the contract. If you're willing to do it and you have a great experience with us, cool. Here's a discount for a case study and your logo rights. That's important to us. If you're willing to upfront commit to references, and then we can invite you into our sales motion and our other customers into our sales motion early and make suggestions. Hey, we're working with these folks over there. They have a very similar use case. We'd love to have you talk to them as the next step while you're evaluating. That's going to help us accelerate the deal cycle. It's going to help people make decisions and provide an excellent buying experience. And again, that is worth us some money as well. So those are the things that are important for us right now at Common Room. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Happy to go into more detail.
Chris, when are you bringing this up in your sales cycle?
Good question. So I've actually been thinking about this a lot recently. Typically, it's happening towards like the middle end when we're having the pricing conversation. I'm wondering for certain segments if we should actually bring it up a little bit earlier and get that wheel spinning. I don't know if that's the right answer yet. It's probably worth a test. And then we can iterate off of our learnings. But most of the time, it's been in the business case discussion. We're starting to talk about pricing. At Metadata, we would do it like post demo, probably like maybe even the call after the big full demo when we really ironed out all the use cases and we were walking through what the business case was with those folks. So it's a little bit later. At Common Room, I think it might be interesting to bring it up a little bit sooner, given some of the speed at which some of our customers are deciding to work with us or not.
And how does that actually play out? Do your reps literally give the price and then they say, and by the way, there's this menu right now? Or what's the nuance in the delivery of the discount menu?
Yeah, so far it's been like customers will be like, hey, what does pricing look like? Or maybe they'll ask the typical, like, how can we sharpen the pencil and that type of stuff? Great, glad you asked. We make it really simple. Here are the different levers that you can pull on that can lower the price for you. And these are the things that we ask for in return. And it also sets the table for the give-get sort of relationship, if you will, when you're running through that.
So I imagine one objection that's running through an audience member's head right now is, okay, if I show them this discount menu, and one of those things is, as long as you sign before the end of the month, you'll have access to this discount menu. I imagine there will be some prospects that will push back and say, aren't you going to have the same Cheesecake Factory menu next month? And what's to say that because I just happened to show up at your door today, that I shouldn't be able to get the same discount that a prospect who signs next month gets? How do you handle that?
Honestly, you have to be willing to say no, which is really, really hard to do. I totally understand that, but you have to be willing to do it.
So the things that you have on your current discount menu are if somebody signs up during the trial period, if they commit to logo rights and writing a case study, if they have a good experience, and then another one is upfront committing to being a reference. How big are you making these discounts? And are they based on a dollar figure? Are they based on a percentage? Are they based on something else? What's the actual structure of these?
Yeah, right now they're a percentage. And individually, they're not massive, but they can add up. So basically, if you choose to stack all of them, and some of them are really easy, like it's very easy to say yes to references. That's great. Awesome. So there you go. There's 5%. It's a little bit harder to say yes to signing on before the trial ends because that condenses the time in which you need to make the decision. So I'll just add, you have to run a really amazing buying process that is rooted in helping your customers make decisions instead of forcing them into decisions, because otherwise this doesn't really work that well. And it probably degrades the buying experience, frankly, because it's not, man, like you can't force me to buy. Like right now, I'm not ready. But if you've helped them get ready, this is a nice conversation. Hey, if you are ready to move forward, here's an option for you that I'm sure your CFO would like. Yeah. So right now, the way I've started it, and we're testing this, so it might subject to change, is for the commitment to like 3 reference calls that I can call you for. I have that on for 5%, and then 7.5% if you commit to signing on before your trial ends. There were some others in there, like I was toying with G2 reviews and case studies and logo rights. Logo rights is in there at 2% actually right now, but I might experiment. But that's part of this process too, is you get real-time feedback on what your customers are willing to do, what they place value in, if they think the discounts are low, if they think the discounts are high, if they think they're fair, all that stuff. And then you can obviously iterate over time, but that's what we've set up so far.
So I can add up 5%, 10%, 7%. That gets me to whatever, 22%. But the problem, Chris, is I actually want a 35% discount. So you're going to have to figure out how to give me that.
Why? I mean, I think that's going back to like our sales process fundamentals. Like it's not available. It is okay to say no. And again, it's recognize. I know a lot of buyers are going to do this. I had someone, we were negotiating this at Metadata, and they said to me, we have other software providers that give us an 80% discount. And I was like, great. I'm glad that you have that for them, but we have a different business and we're not going to do that. And so if you've done a good job of helping your customers see the value, then you've earned the right to say no in that instance. They can add up the rest of it. But I mean, I think you just have to say no, frankly. You have to have a lot of confidence in your product. Having good product matters here, to be honest.
What's your take on when a rep comes to you saying, hey, I presented the discount menu, but the prospect wants something that's not on that menu. They want a second instance for a sandbox, or they want other things where it's like maybe less of the commercials and more of you're doing something less than conventional with the product?
Yeah, ooh, that's a good question. I mean, there's always going to be outliers. And I think like everybody has strategic logos. Everybody tiers their accounts. Everybody knows the value of certain accounts to their business and having those. Be aware of that when you're entering these negotiations. Profile of customer, right? If that's going to unlock a new vertical for me, if having them as a reference is like going to open up, additional doors for me, or if it's a new use case that I can test and promote, awesome. Those things are valuable. I might do that and explore that with the customer. That's a great opportunity to coach your reps and say, use your judgment. And these are the types of things that you should use to guide your judgment, the things I just mentioned. And that's a great escalation, right? Let's get leadership involved and let's talk about those things. There's always variability. Defining the guardrails or the sort of boxes around the sandbox where AEs can play in, I think is pretty important in that context.
The other thing that comes to mind here is Anthony Anarino was on our podcast a while back, and he wrote a book all on competitors called Eat Their Lunch. And one of the things he talks about doing is if someone comes in with an unreasonable ask, you need to match it with an equally unreasonable ask. So if someone's asking for an off-menu term or a 40% discount and your menu only goes to 17%, you can say, look, that's not on the menu. I can talk to finance, but they're probably going to ask me, can you do a 3-year deal with a full lock-in and buy extra seats and do wall-to-wall and 7 more references? And they'll be like, oh my God, it just sets the expectation that there's going to be a big equal give for every get they get in return. And part of the reason you can have that conversation is because you've already posed the menu that has a bunch of trades on it. You're not doing unilateral concessions. So Chris, it sounds like this discount menu was one of the first things that you rolled out to the Common Room team. And you just started leading their sales organization not too long ago. I'm curious. Sometimes I've seen sales leaders enter an org. They're all about building pipeline. They're all about negotiation. How did you figure out where you wanted to get started?
Yeah. So I actually figured out where I wanted to get started before I joined the team, frankly, in the interview process. So I will shout out the interview process was pretty awesome. I got access to a ton of data, call recordings, all of that stuff. So as you're evaluating a new opportunity as a leader, having that insight before you jump in is super useful. So I had already formulated a hypothesis around sales process, how we structured POCs, what our free trial motion looked like, all that type of stuff. So I sort of started before I got started, if you will. In looking at the data that we had, it was just very clear that we had 2 different segments. And then in unpacking that and looking at our SMB and our commercial and our enterprise, who Matt leads the enterprise team and I'm leading the commercial teams, it was clear we had these different segments. And so then I was like, all right, well, let's look at the data individually. Let's actually draw the lines so that we can decide what we're going to do that's based in data, so that if you're rolling out a new process, AEs that don't know you and you have no rapport and credibility with yet are like, what are you talking about? We want to avoid that. So having that data and seeing that for companies that were 125 employees and below, our sales cycles looked like this. They were this number of days. Above that was this number of days. This is what the ACV was. This is how long they were in every single stage. And then actually going in and doing the work of watching the call recordings, looking at the deals, talking to your AEs about how they're running different things, and then saying, okay, I'm confirming or not confirming my hypothesis. In this instance, I confirmed my hypothesis, which was we can run a lot faster deal cycles. Mark Kozlow talks about this. There's one really simple thing you find when you start doing this is you start to look at how much time is in between every single step when you watch a gong sequence or a Clary sequence or a call recording. And you're like, oh man, not only can we tighten up our buying experience and what we're doing live and in calls, but there are 2 weeks that are going by between each one of these calls. If there's one deal that I'm thinking of, if you do that 3 times, 4 times, you're automatically adding 6 weeks to 2 months to your deal. That's crazy, right? You don't have to do that. So that's just like a little aside. But on the process itself, it was very clear that we were letting our customers like completely lead the process instead of us coaching or guiding them on how companies make the decision of whether or not to purchase Common Room or not. So not completely saying this is exactly what you're going to do, but this is how companies typically evaluate us and then walking them through that. And so What was really clear is that in the free trial motion that we have, or customers that say, hey, we want to spin up a free trial, great, that's awesome. So we have our first call, we flesh out that there is value. Typically from here, customers are going to spin up their instance. We're going to send you some information about what data sources to connect and some Loom videos on specific plays that you can create within your instance. You're getting them started, but you're also giving them some homework, so they have to invest in this a little bit. We're going to have 3 calls over the course of the next 14 days. So call number 1 after this is we're going to spend an hour. We're going to make sure you set everything up correctly. We're going to show you live how to design some of these plays that we know based off our conversation are going to be useful for you. And we're going to sort of lay out the roadmap for how you validate this both technically and from a use case. Then we're going to let you play with it for a few days, right? And so then 5 days later, we're going to have another call. That call will be shorter, typically about 30 minutes. We'll send you some information in the meantime. These are the people that should be involved on your side based on what you've told us, someone from the SDR team, maybe a sales rep, et cetera. And we'll start to get a little bit more detailed into how you can design some of the more custom things and automations and whatnot. That's the 3rd call. And the 4th call is we'll have a feedback session, right? We'll review how this went. We'll review what you thought was working well. We'll review what you thought was not working well. And we'll decide if this is something that you want to pursue moving forward with. And if you're ready to move forward, we'll talk about that. And if you're not, we'll also talk about that. But you're clearly setting the expectation that they're going to spend about 90 minutes with you over the course of the next 14 days. You have homework as the AE. They have homework as the customer. The expectations are very clearly set. And you're obviously going to have touch points in between. And those touch points are really important too, and coaching the AEs on what those should be. Loom video, set up Slack channel, open line of communication, making sure you're basically wrapping your arms around them while also not doing all of the work for them in our particular instance, so that they can make sure they're invested in it just as much as we are. And what, in theory, this will do, and obviously we're still continuing to flesh it out, but so far it's working, is it'll shorten our sales cycle. It seems like it's more work than we've been doing with our other deals, but it's actually not, because we are doing all of these things. But when you look at the deal structure and the email back and forth and Salesforce and Clary, you can see that these things are happening, but they're not happening succinctly in a tight window. They're happening over a period of more weeks than it needs to. For these particular organizations, I think with what we sell, you can make decisions quickly about whether or not you want to invest in signal-based selling, or if you're ready for that and how it fits into your sales motion. It's an easy thing relatively to validate. And so we just need to help our customers do it.
So I just want to recap a couple of the things that Chris was looking at. So the way I think about it is there are 3 types of problems you can solve in a sales organization and a million different permutations of those problems. You have prospecting problems, you have discovery problems, and then you have process problems. For prospecting problems, you're oftentimes looking at pipeline generation by source, figuring out if the team's doing enough outbound. For discovery problems, you're watching the calls, you're looking at the conversion between stage 0 and stage 1 to stage 2. Can people even get people to convert down the funnel? And then for process, this is where you got really smart, is you're looking at your deal sizes, you're looking at the steps in your sales cycle, and you're looking at the spacing between those steps. Or some sales cycles taking too long and you could possibly combine some of those stages into one step or one call. And so you zoomed in on the process piece because you're like, these are SMB deals. These need to be moving way, way faster. Let's look at our sales process. You found that the team was running POCs. They were probably throwing the product in the customer's hands and saying, hey, play around with it. And then at the end of this thing, let us know what you think. And so what you did is you added a little bit more rigidity and you forced a 3-call, 14-day POC, and that probably cut your sales cycle in half. And it also probably prevented your team from going after the wrong types of trials. Do I have that right?
Correct. That is absolutely right. And much more well said.
So can I ask you a question? Because this is really hard. I've stepped into sales organizations and I've been a bull in a china shop before. And I've seen a lot of VPs come in and they're like, screw everything you're doing. We're doing Sandler. And it goes totally wrong. So you come in, you have this discount menu, you have the new POC process, the new pilot process. How did you get the team on board with this and not have them feel like you were just coming in and changing everything up on them without acknowledging what was working?
2 things. I spend a lot of time really trying to learn who the person is that is on my team, not just you as a seller, but who you are, right? And that does a couple of things. One, I really do care about the people on my team, and I want them to know that. And so that helps me, obviously, when we want to make changes. You're building trust, you're building rapport, you're building credibility at a human level versus just like a employer level, which I think is important, which is a little bit different than sales tactics, but I think it's really important. The second part of it is I'm doing it also. I'm not just like saying, hey, this is what I want to do, go forth, come back to me when you run into an issue. I'm doing it too. Like I'm going to run, if we're going to install a new process, I'm going to run some deals side by side with you, and I'm going to do this too. And we're going to see how it works, because I want to know what it feels like. I want to know where I'm getting caught up, because if I'm getting caught up, then I would expect other people to get caught up too. And I want to feel that. And if you're in the mud, if you will, with your team, obviously that gives you and lends you a lot of credibility. I'm not a big fan of just coming in and flipping the table over and making changes without not having all the context that I need to have. Changes will be made, of course, but doing it thoughtfully and tactfully is how they are actually successful. But I think doing the work is huge.
You can't fix everything in your first month. You can't fix everything in your first quarter. What problems did you identify that need to be solved that you were okay letting burn for a time?
So I think the biggest one is, I know this is like a champagne problem, but we have a capacity issue in that on my team that have 50 deals open at a time. We have a ton of interest in our product, which is incredible. But obviously that means that we are losing deals that we should win, because humans can only work on so many different things at once, and 50 deals is just not doable. So hiring became incredibly important and was the number one thing on my list, even before process. Process was like a short second, because it would have an immediate impact for the reps that were here and help them run those 50 deals a little bit better. But I have been at many organizations where I have seen people hire way too fast and not the right profile. And that does them a disservice. It creates way more fires in the long term than it does sort of solve in the short term, because then you're passing off deals to AEs that are not well equipped to close them. I'm saying all this because the fire that chosen to let smolder is that rep capacity to an extent. We have to solve it, obviously, but we did not make any sacrifices, literally zero sacrifices, on how rigorous our interview process was and our rubric, basically, that we score on when we're interviewing them, because they have to be a really good fit, because as soon as they come in, they're going to get flooded with inbound and they need to contribute, and it's going to be an accelerated onboarding, and we got to make sure we have the right profile of rep that is fair to them, and also it's important to us. So I would say we kind of let that smolder and didn't just hire the first cohort of AEs and stayed really rigorous. I don't know if that's a fair answer for you, Nick, but that's what comes to mind immediately.
How did you manage that conversation? Because I've been on the receiving end of, Armand, you've hired 1 rep or 2 reps per quarter. I want you to hire 2 reps per month. And I'm like, hold on. I'm not just going to flood the team with junk because things are going well, but I've had that pressure from the board, from the founder, from the market, from the valuation and all that stuff. How did you tactfully push back other than just saying, we're working on it?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't have to, which was great, if I'm being totally candid. The pressure was definitely there to solve the problem, but there was never any push to change the rubric or the process. It might mean that I spend more time interviewing candidates and my calendar is more full with interviews and I have to sacrifice being in other meetings and things of that nature. But there was never a desire or a push to sacrifice on candidate quality, because I think we all understand here how important it is. I think lucky in that respect, like fully supported there.
How did you respond to the pressure that you got as a sales leader?
Yeah. So it's hard because you want to push on the candidate quality bar, but it's a hard argument to hold up because it's sort of this abstract concept of, why don't we hire 5 recruiting firms to get you better people faster and you can interview more? And I think this was especially the case in the bull market. Today, people are a lot more receptive. A bear market, be a little bit more cautious. Where I have found the most compelling argument to be is as follows. It actually goes back to Chris's point around identifying the right place to put your focus. And so what is hiring going to do if everyone's pipeline is empty? Or what is hiring going to do if the inbound leads are already stretched super thin? You might actually just have a top of funnel issue. And so I would do things like pulling up reps' calendars, and I would just be like, look, there's not a lot of room to spread this around the team. Or I would look at things like pipeline generation per rep and how much inbound we were getting. And I would say things like, look, like if this is going to scale as a team, everything needs to scale with it. Otherwise, what's going to happen is look at the average win rates for a new rep versus an old rep. And the average win rates for a newer rep was always lower. And so I've seen a lot of teams enter these situations where they'll hire 2 or 3 reps, and sometimes revenue actually goes down because the leads aren't going in the hands of the best players anymore. So that's how I find that you have to counter it. Today, I think everyone's a little bit wary of overhiring. And so now people actually appreciate it when a leader doesn't want to just hit their number by hiring a million reps. They want to hit their number by hiring efficient.
I would say I've seen that movie too. And I've been like an AE in an organization that was doing that. AEs don't want to work there. Yeah. Right. It creates a attrition problem too for the top performers. Man, like what is going on? This doesn't feel like the place that I was at before. I'm not in my number in the same way. It can really deflate the culture in addition to obviously pulling the metrics down across the board too. So
one of my old fellow first sales hires at Pave, he called it the cling to the middle strategy, which is when a team gets bloated, everyone at the top and the bottom leave. So you lose your best reps who are the most efficient, and you have to lose your bottom reps because your team is bloated. And then you're just sort of clinging to this like middle mediocre layer and trying to get as many like reps to hit quota, but no one's really, really crushing it. And it's just a very painful way to grow. So Chris, this was a phenomenal episode. We have to move to our final question, and it is this. We talked about a lot of good habits that sales leaders can exhibit, but what is one bad habit that every sales leader should break so that all teams can get a little bit better?
Giving feedback and asking for updates incessantly over Slack. Stop doing it. It drives everybody crazy. And that's what I'll say about that.
No perpetual Slack 24/7 pipeline reviews. Chris, amazing show. Everyone hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Cheers. Alrighty, Nick, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Chris from Common Room. What do you have for your 2?
So number 1 is roll out a discount menu to empower your reps with the different levers that they have available and speed that back half of your sales cycle by being very clear about what's approved and what's not to help them with their buyer-seller conversations. The things that he included on his menu were the customer's agreement to sign up and sign a contract during their trial period. 2, agreeing to commit to a case study and logo rights, an upfront commitment to references, and he's playing with this one, G2 reviews. So pick what matters to your business and build your own discount menu. Number 2, before you join a new organization or a new segment, do things like looking at the data and listen to call recordings for that segment or team you're going to be taking over. What Chris did was he looked at company size against sales cycle length, time in each stage, and ACV. And that allowed him to form a hypothesis of the areas he could have the biggest impact on his segment's cycle.
Number 3, when you're coming in to diagnose problems in a sales organization, one thing that Chris looked at was the spacing between sales calls. And what he found is that you could consolidate a few steps into fewer steps, or you could reduce the spacing between how many calls you have in a sales cycle. And that brings us to number 4. Chris introduced the 3-call, 14-day POC. A beginning, middle, and end checkpoint where you're not just throwing the product at the customer and saying, do you want to buy it at the end of it? But you're dictating the exact trials they're going to run, the things they're going to do, and the exit criteria at the end. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
One of my favorite leadership episodes of this show was one I wasn't on. It was you and Mark Cosaglow doing a full deep dive on how to diagnose your pipeline problem. And so if you like the structured data breakdown that we talked about, how Chris evaluated company size, sales cycle, time and cycle, etc., you, Armand, and Mark did a full deep dive on how to diagnose the data around where you might be struggling in pipe gen. And so that was a really good listen if your top of funnel pipe gen isn't where it needs to be and you need to figure out where to apply your efforts to make a fix. So there's a link to that episode in the show notes. Go check it out. And thank you as always for listening to 30 MPC.